Hi, welcome back to Christine's Home Affairs. A few weeks ago, I put out a video and said you could ask me anything. This is going to be part 2 of the answers to those questions that you've asked me. There's been quite a lot, so I'm going to have to do them over a few different videos. And some are going to be more practical things that I need to go through, so when I can use my arm again, I'll do that in a separate video. I've had lots and lots of questions asked, so I'm going to go through and answer as many of those questions as I can today. First of all, my shoulder. It's just over 2 weeks since I've had my surgery. It's probably the first week I've had since I've had a much clearer head, so I haven't been able to answer comments in the videos much lately. I just haven't had the headspace. It's really difficult to type with one hand as well. So my head's fog-free at the moment, plus I've got my coffee and everything's healing well. I just have to be patient and let the healing process run its course. My big achievements in the past 2 weeks are that I've learnt to dress myself. I can actually brush my own hair. Chris has been doing a fabulous job helping me out though. And this morning he challenged me to tie my shoelaces one-handed, and I actually managed to do that without having to watch a YouTube tutorial. So I feel like I've achieved great things with my one hand. Let's answer some of these questions that you've asked me. I've had many people ask me this question in several videos, and Louise actually specifically asked for this one. Can I sew and sell the products that you make from your videos? Absolutely, you can. YouTube is a free platform. It's a place where we all go for information and guidance. I'm absolutely thrilled when people send me photos of products that they've been making and they've been selling at their own market stalls. So definitely go for it. If you see anything in any of my videos, I don't hold any copyright over anything. They're not all my designs. I've only got a few that are my own designs, and other things I just tweak or modify. So I totally think you should all go for it and sew and sell as much as you can. Lyndon has asked about my camera setup. So this is my cutting table here, and usually I'm on the opposite side of where you're looking at now. I have a camera set up on my ceilings, and I also, you can see that black arm hanging off the end of a trolley just there. That's one of the arms that I use on one side of my sewing machine, so I'll just clip my phone to that. I do all my recording with my mobile phone, so I clip it onto that arm there, and I also will have a tripod standing up on this side as well. So it just depends on my mood whether or not I want to record from this side of the machine or record from the other side of the machine. I've tried lots of different camera mounts and arms and things over the past few years, and I'm still tweaking that. But the best one I've got is this overhead one that comes from the ceiling. That's fantastic on my cutting table. Amy has asked, how do you get odour out of vintage fabric? She's tried vinegar and baking soda, which is probably the first thing that I would have tried. The other thing I would suggest is to put the fabric into a bag and put a whole heap of baking soda in that, seal the bag, and let that baking soda absorb all of those smells. So I think that's probably the best thing to try. The other thing, if you can wash the fabric without any issues, lemon juice in the water will help as well. So I hope that one helps you, Amy. Carol has a problem with static in her machine area. Now, I'm not sure if the static is coming off the sewing machine or the fabric, but apparently static is increased in a room that is very dry. So you could perhaps put a humidifier in your room or put some plants in there because they create humidity or something. I'm not really sure how that works, but there's some suggestions that I've tried to Google to see how to overcome that problem with static. The other thing you could do is either use some dryer sheets and wipe them over your machine area if your machine is what's causing the problems, and anti-static spray. So you can get this spray that you put on your clothing, you spray it on your clothing, and it helps remove that static with your pantyhose or your nylons. So spraying that onto a cloth and then onto your machine, if the machine is the problem, that might help your problem as well. Teresa has said that her needles break constantly, especially when you're going over thick areas. This one I'm going to have to give you a practical example when I can get to my machine. But there's a thing called a hump jumper. I did do a video some time ago on hemming jeans, and in there I've used a hump jumper. And if you go back and have a look at that video, I'll actually pop a link down below. It shows you how to use that over the thickness, but it also explains what happens with the presser foot on your machine as you're sewing over those thicknesses of fabric. So go and have a quick look at that. Hopefully that video will help you, Teresa. If not, I'll get back to that one soon. What you can also do is roll up a little piece of fabric and sew over that first. And then when you get to the thickness of your fabric, have that sitting behind the fabric so that it's nice and level. You want your sewing machine foot to be level as you're sewing. When it goes on an angle up or down, it actually causes the needle to deflect, and that's when you can get your broken needles and do damage to your stitch plate and your needle plate and your foot. Another great suggestion I've had whilst I'm out of action is to go over and talk about some of my other videos and what things I would change in those particular videos. I've done several videos of the Helping Hands card holders. So they are a round disc that hold your playing cards for people with arthritis or kids that can't hold lots of cards. There's two things that I've learnt since I've been selling them. And one is that I actually need to put 2 CDs on each side of the playing card holders instead of one. People come into the shop and they'll pull apart the CDs or DVDs, and they pull too hard and they're causing them to snap. I've had this happen twice, and I've had a couple of other people comment as well that they've had this problem. So I'm going to solve that problem by putting 2 CDs or DVDs on each side of the playing card holders. That's going to make it much more difficult for people to prise them apart, and therefore they won't snap. The other thing that I realised after doing the videos, if you want to do it by machine, increase your bottom tension all the way so that you want to have it as loose as possible using a really strong thread like an upholstery thread. Increase the bobbin tension all the way. It's going to make it the stitching really loose and have your stitch length really long, and then as you're drawing your thread through, it slides around that circle that you've cut out really easily. That'll all make sense if you go and watch one of those Helping Hands videos. The other day I put a video up for the chapstick holders. Now a couple of people have asked me, are they going to fall out? Well, they've got little swivel clips on the top, so if they're just hanging from your bag, unless you're flopping around a lot or the chapstick is very loose in there, it shouldn't come out. I would actually clip it to my bag but have it sitting on the inside, so if it were to fall out, it would fall in. But then somebody mentioned about perhaps bike riders. You know, they want to have access to it, but it'll fall off when they're riding. And that's a great point. So if I don't get a chance to do a video soon, because I'll redo this with a snap, but if you increase the cutting length of the fabric, add an extra inch to it, when you do the fold over, you'll increase the fold from 3 inches to 4 inches, and then add one of those little plastic snaps to it. That'll solve your problem. Your chapstick holder will snap closed, and you can use that on your bike or wherever else, and it's not going to fall out. That'll also solve the problem for different size chapstick holders, because a smaller one might easily fall out. I've had some personal questions asked, and I'm always happy to answer those. So we moved from Germany to Australia in the 1960s. I was about 4 years old when we came, and Leslie has asked, why did we move from Germany to Australia? Well, that was my father's idea. Apparently, we were either going to move to Australia or South Africa. According to what I was told, there were ads in the newspapers in Germany inviting people to migrate to Australia. It's for a fabulous life and so many benefits. So the choice was Australia or South Africa. I don't know why one was better than the other, but we ended up in Australia, my mum, my sister, myself and my father. So that's the story that my parents told me as we were growing up. And look, I love Australia. I love Germany too. I've been back and I'm in a good spot. And speaking of places to live, somebody has asked me what I liked best about Ngambie. When we came to Australia, we moved to Melbourne. So we've always lived in the southeastern suburbs of Melbourne. I grew up in Melbourne, loved it, had a great time. And in my early 30s, there was just my twin sons and myself. They were about just over 12 months old. We decided to move from Melbourne up to the country, and that was probably 2.5 hours from where my family and friends were. I think I've always been a country girl at heart. I don't know why, there's no reason for it, but I love the country. And so I made the decision to move out of Melbourne to a place that I could afford and end up giving my kids a better life. I managed to buy a home for my kids and I, and it's something that I would never have been able to achieve as a single parent in Melbourne. I've always known that when my kids grew up, the country would be too isolated for them and that they would move back to Melbourne. Ngambie is halfway between where we used to live and Melbourne, where they hang out now. So I used to always say that when my kids grew up and moved to Melbourne, Ngambie was where I was going to stop. I like Melbourne for a visit, but there's just too many people around for me. Too many people scare me. I'm happy being in my own little world in Ngambie. And where have I travelled around Australia? Well, I haven't actually done that much travelling. I've worked 2 or 3 jobs at a time, so I've always been really busy. But now with Chris and I, we play table tennis. We compete in the veterans tournaments around Victoria, and it enables us to travel around Australia and play in the nationals teams. So we get to travel that way. We are also avid rock and rollers. We taught rock and roll dancing for a few years, and we actually have a YouTube channel where we teach it as well. And so what we would do when we travel around Australia, we would just wing it wherever we were travelling. We wouldn't book accommodation. We would just drive up the coast and we would Google wherever there were table tennis clubs. We'd give the club a call. If they were open to us that evening, that's a town that we would sleep in that night. So it was a bit of fun not knowing where we were going to go and sleep, but that way we would go and travel to different towns that we had never heard of before and meet different people that we'd never met before, have fun travelling with table tennis on the way up to tournaments. On the way home, we would look for rock and roll clubs and we would do the same thing. So we would spend the next few days driving home, looking for places that had rock and roll dances, and that's where we would stop in the evenings. We usually do like a 7 or 10 day stint for table tennis. So we try and pack lots of things into our trips when we do go. So that's the extent of my travels around Australia. How long have I been sewing? Several people have asked about my sewing and craft life. I've been crafting most of my life. The very first person to teach me to knit, I was about 6 years old. There was a lady, Dot. Her name was Dot. She used to look after us while my parents went to work, and she was always knitting or doing crochet. So she would show me how to do all of these fancy stitches. And I think I developed my love of craft from there. I used to watch Mum sew buttons and darn socks all the time. And it wasn't until I went to high school that I did a semester at school there and did a little bit of sewing. And then I would just intermittently do sewing and that sort of thing until I was in my early 20s. And then a sewing machine came my way and I just thought, okay, I can do this. I used to think I was a designer. I'd make ridiculous looking clothes in the 80s. In the 80s, it was okay because we all wore ridiculous clothes. So I used to think I was a great fashion designer making baggy pants without cuffs and hems and seams, but nobody could see them because I had a cummerbund on and big boots. I've never been professionally taught. I've done lots of courses and things over the years, read lots of books, and I've tried to sit in on whatever classes and things that I could. Books have been a fantastic place for me to learn how to do sewing. YouTube's a great place as well. When I had my fabric shop, I used to actually have a lady that taught dressmaking and pattern drafting, so I actually learned quite a lot from her. So for a few years she taught there and I would sit in on the classes and learn all about that kind of thing as well. So my experience with clothing and dressmaking, it's been spread out over the past couple of decades. I am doing a tailoring course at the moment. It's an online course that goes for a couple of years. So I'm always looking to try and improve my skills wherever I can. Some of the other crafts that I've been doing over the past few years, well, there's knitting, crochet. I used to love doing tapestries, cross stitch. I've done some hardanger, and I actually have a piece of hardanger, but I'm too scared to cut the threads, so I'm up to that level, but I don't want to cut the threads in case I've made a mistake. One day I will get back to that. And embroidery, I absolutely love hand embroidery. I love to do hand sewing. I don't get the time to do that these days. Quilts, I've done hundreds of quilts and used to do a lot of quilt designs and pattern designs when I had the quilt shop, and that was a lot of fun as well. I learnt a lot there. Whenever there was an opportunity to do a class or go to a class, I was always there. That's pretty much how I've learnt to do anything. Now, there've been lots of other questions that have been asked, and I'm sure you've got more. I won't let this drag out too long, but it was a good way to do a video and keep you guys updated whilst I can't do anything. I'm incredibly bored. Now that my brain is a lot less foggy than it was the last couple of weeks, I'm getting really itchy to do something. So I'm going to, I do have a couple of projects cut out that I managed to do before I had the surgery. So I'm hoping that in the next week or two I might have a little bit more mobility, and I'll be able to start putting things through the machine and then start making a couple of different projects. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have any other questions you'd like to ask me, let me know and I'll get to it in another video. Catch you next time.